Hello, hello. We are live for the Millionaires in Medicine Club Q&A. Sorry for the reschedule. That was completely my urgent family issue that came up, but glad we could be here and start diving into questions. So I'm going to pull questions from inside the Millionaires in Medicine Club to answer. If you've posted a question in there, sent somebody on the team a message, that's how your question will get answered here. And then we try to let people know, hey, if you couldn't attend live, your question just got answered so that they can circle back and still get the scoop. If you're not already in the club, www.millionairesinmedicine.com/community is how you get there. Millionairesinmedicine.com/community. Again, totally free to join. We currently have almost 4,000 members, all medical professionals, all looking to figure out how to clear debt strategically, build wealth through investing in the stock bond market, real estate, etc., save on taxes, all of that good stuff. So let's cover a couple of questions. We got a question first. Let me get this pulled up. This is from Alyssa. Great question. I'm looking for some advice on where to keep our short to midterm savings. Right now, we have our emergency fund. They have a full 6 months of expenses and several savings buckets: wedding, honeymoon, next car, all in an Ally high yield savings account. But the rates keep dropping. It's down to 3.6%. And this is the first time I'm really feeling the decline of high yield savings account rates since opening the account. Are there other options I should consider, like a money market fund? I've heard of them, but I haven't really bothered with them before because the high yield savings account was returning so well. What do you think? So, this is the nature of the beast. As we enter a season where interest rates start to come down, and all predictions, even despite the new tariff stuff, is that they will continue to come down, we will see the return on high yield savings accounts decline, and they will probably continue to do so. When I opened my high yield savings account, interest rates were very, very low, and I was earning 1%. And honestly, that was great because it was way higher than what I was earning in my traditional savings account at my brick and mortar bank. And I was thrilled about that at the time. But if you're newer to the high yield savings account game, you've entered in a season where you're earning pretty good returns for doing nothing. Well, it won't last. And while you could consider a money market mutual fund, which you can hold inside your brokerage account, and sometimes they do return slightly more than a high yield savings account, remember two things. One, while it's still considered a very, very safe place to keep money, it doesn't fall under that same FDIC insurance that your money would in a high yield savings account. So while it's, again, still a very low risk place to put your short to midterm savings, you might have slightly more risk there without that FDIC insurance piece. The other thing is that those money market funds are usually invested in short-term, high-quality debt securities. And a lot of those are tied to interest rates as well. And so as we see high yield savings account interest rates or returns go down, we're going to see the same thing in our money market funds. And so it's not wrong to say, hey, I'm going to use a money market. I'm not getting what I'm wanting out of my high yield savings, but it's unlikely that you're going to fix the experience that you're having with interest rates going down and those high yield savings accounts rates or returns going down as well. So keep that in mind. You know, there are really big downsides to being in a high interest rate environment. If you're trying to sell a car, you probably experienced that. But that was one of the upsides. And so naturally, as we come to the end of that season, that's going to change. So Alyssa's not a bad option. And still, if you are at Ally, I actually have one of my high yield savings is at Ally, and I really like it. I'm not paid to say that, but they do have some extra features if you are new to the high yield savings account space that are really helpful. One of which is they do have virtual buckets. And so, like Alyssa mentioned, hey, we have emergency reserves, we have wedding, we have honeymoon, we have car. You can actually separate all that out virtually. So you have one account number to mess with. You only have to open one account, but you also have these buckets. So you can really organize your savings well. And make sure you know, hey, when I'm booking the honeymoon, how much of this money was actually for the honeymoon versus, emergency reserves, which is helpful from that standpoint. All right, let's see what we got in here. So, okay, I know. Here we go. Someone commented their question on here. Okay, we got that. Second year pharmacy student looking to work at a clinical pharmacy in Oregon once I pass all my boards. Uh, help me find a good spot to work in that area. So welcome. We love pharmacists. We have a lot of pharmacists in our world. And it's interesting. We actually just created some content on how to maximize income as a pharmacist. And so if you're a second year pharmacy student, you may watch that. The clinical pharmacy route, they mentioned a clinical pharmacy. I'm not sure if by that they mean they want to work in a retail pharmacy, or by pursuing clinical pharmacy, they're saying that I actually want to be a clinical pharmacy specialist. But when it comes to maximizing income as a pharmacist, it's ironic because the clinical pharmacy track doesn't always get you there, which is funny because it's additional schooling, years of lost income, but in a roundabout way, it can. And so, if you are a pharmacist, I actually just released some content inside of the club walking through the highest paying positions for pharmacists. Some of them, there are some subspecialties that clinical pharmacy specialists can hold that can be very high paying, but a lot of the money is actually in transitioning eventually into pharma or industry in general. And clinical pharmacy specialist roles tend to lend really well to that because of the nature of the subspecialized knowledge they have. If you have niche knowledge, like in an area of medicine, for example, in gastroenterology, and you are like a beast at IBD drugs, and then an MSL position, for example, comes to light near you or in an area you're interested in being and is on an IBD drug, well, you're very well positioned for that. And that can actually create a huge spike in income. So you'll have to, it sounds like this person is relatively earlier in their career trajectory, but those are important things to think about. Of course, there's more to life than money. You got to love your job. But I like to start very early on thinking about what is the income trajectory of the choice I'm making? What is the return on investment of the decision I'm making? Same thing I tell all of those students that I'll precept PA students in particular about whether or not they should get a DMS. It's really hard to sit down and think about when you're brand new clinically or you're brand new to your profession, like what is the long-term professional development of this decision? What is the personal joy from this decision? What is the long-term financial gain from this decision? And I do think it is important, if you're going to be an optimal decision maker, to try to make decisions that have some component of all three of those pieces. Not everything you do is going to have a huge return on investment for yourself, but you should have some return on investment if it's something that's substantial. And you should be thinking about that very, very early on. So if you're a new PA, that'll be interesting. I just had a really interesting conversation with someone who's relatively high up in PA academics over the last couple of weeks about the trajectory of the DMS becoming an entry-level position, entry-level degree for PAs, what it will look like for existing PAs like myself who have a master's and not a DMS, and the interesting utilization or bringing in of clinical tracks into those programs that previously didn't exist. When those programs started, they were really heavily geared towards leadership and administration, and now they've really transitioned, and there are clinical tracks available, which is relatively new. The question is, again, what's the return on investment? What's the compensation change that will happen for you clinically if you're able to complete that degree? But yeah, we could talk about that for a whole 500 hours. All right, so we got a question from someone who actually is a PA, who's been a PA for 6 months. They had said, hey, look, new to the profession, again, 6 months in, debating between doing Airbnb arbitrage or starting my own remote practice. What do you think, type of thing? Well, I'm not going to get into so much practice ownership. I do think the more seasoned of a clinician you are, the better positioned you are to step into any of those roles. I would worry a little bit about moving as a new clinician into something like that, because practice ownership is business ownership. Business ownership requires a skill set that is entirely 100% different than your clinical skill set. And as a new clinician, you probably don't have the clinical skill set yet. I know I didn't. And, the first 6, 9, 12 months, it took a while to build that up. And I think you might end up having some professional, I don't want to say delays, but maybe not maximizing your potential if you're splitting your focus between how do I build my business skill set and how do I build my clinical skill set, and you're trying to do it all at once. Now, of course, I don't know, this person may already have an MBA and have already run a business before they went to PA school and became a PA. So if that's you, then the path to early practice ownership might make a lot of sense because you already have one of those skill sets. So you're only building one. But if you're a new clinician and you're a new business owner and you're trying to do both of those things simultaneously, it would be very difficult for you to become the master of both of those at the same time. And I think one of them would probably come at the expense of the other. That's the practice ownership side. Let's talk about the Airbnb arbitrage side, because that's actually more interesting from a money standpoint. So if you're not familiar with Airbnb arbitrage, what you do is you take someone else's property that they own as a long-term rental, and you rent it with their explicit permission to sublease it basically as a short-term rental. And so by doing that, you kind of benefit in the margins, right? They keep their property, they get the long-term rent from you. Of course, short-term rentals have a higher cash flow than long-term rentals. And so you profit off the difference. You manage the Airbnb and then market it accordingly. You create this agreement with the property owner, and you can kind of create semi-passive income, right? It's not going to be passive income because you're running an Airbnb. It's not passive income if you own an Airbnb either. I mean, we've done that for a while now, and that's definitely semi-passive too. So either way, you're looking at semi-passive income, and it's probably a higher return on time than what you're doing clinically in terms of your hourly rate, but it's still not zero work. Here's where I think people really mess up Airbnb arbitrage. The assumption is, hey, I don't have to go buy a property. So I don't need capital because I don't need a down payment, and there's no mortgage. And so there's no risk. That's where I think people go way wrong. In order to get a property owner to agree to allow you to sublease their apartment, their condo, their house, whatever, as a short-term rental, there has to be an upside for them, right? And if you think about it, there's very obvious downsides. It massively increases the wear and tear on their property, and you're bringing in constantly all these different people versus having the ability to screen one really good tenant and know they're the ones there, right? And so, what's the upside? Why would anyone agree to this? Well, you have to pretty much guarantee them a long-term lease. Otherwise, why would they say yes? So most of the time when people are doing Airbnb arbitrage, they're agreeing to a 3 to 5 year lease. You can't say, hey, I'll lease your place for 1 year, because they're going to say, oh, there's no benefit for me, right? I could easily go get a long-term tenant for a year, and I'm not going to have as much wear and tear on the property. And then at the year, I'm still dealing with turnover. I'm still dealing with vacancy costs. And then I'll get a new person, right? So you have to really make it to where there's some type of reason why they would agree. So you might say, hey, I'll take this place for 3 years. I'll take this place for 5 years. Then now all of a sudden their turnover costs go to zero. They don't have to worry about any vacancy costs for 5 years, right? And so now they might go, well, now this became completely passive for me as the business owner or as a property owner. And I actually reduced my cost because I don't have to worry about vacancy or turnover for X number of years. They might actually say yes to that. But what you have done is you've put yourself into a legal binding agreement where you owe a monthly payment, right? It's no different really than the mortgage payment. And so you have that obligation. If the property generates the revenue you think it will, great. But what if it doesn't? And as a 6-month out of PA school new grad, do you have the cash reserves in place to cover all of your personal expenses for 3 to 6 months, plus the cash reserves in place to cover the rent and all expenses you would incur on this Airbnb unit as well and have the all the other stuff in place, right? Like all of your consumer debts cleared. You don't have high interest debt. You don't have any more credit card debt. A lot of new grads come out with that, right? It's like a long time where you can't work after graduation. And so, like, all that stuff's done. You don't have high interest debt. You have all this cash and you have the wherewithal to take on the risk. Most new grads aren't in that position. If you happen to be, then great, like go and do the thing, right? And I'm always about generating cash flow sources outside of your primary job. And so it's not a bad idea. But anytime you think of like, hey, this could be a good idea, what's the upside? We all ask that, like, what's the upside? Well, the upside's semi passive income, and I don't have to have a down payment. Cool. What's the downside? How do I cap my downside? How do I mitigate risk? And so you have to think about that piece. And if you're not there, the average let's say the average PA might spend $5,000 a month. So you would have 15 grand in emergency reserves. Plus, let's say your rent is 2,500 a month, 3 grand a month. So now you have another $9,000. So you would need to really realistically have like 25 grand in just cash reserves to make this reasonable. And don't forget, you do need to stage the property because any long-term tenant is going to have probably an empty home, or long-term homeowner is going to have landlord is going to have an empty home. You need to have the money to stage it. And so there's that, gap, right? Of like, most of the time, that's not the very first thing you should be doing as a new grad is adding financial risk. Most of the time, you need to be spending the first 6 to 9 months figuring out, how do I create a student loan strategy? How do I create cash reserves? How do I clear any high interest debt I've accumulated during school? How do I make sure that I have a consistent investing system so that I know I'm at least set for standard retirement? Like, let's at least be able to retire at 65. And then you can start going, okay, cool. Now, how do I create cash flow? How do I retire early? How do I do those other things? But you have to kind of like piece it all into the big picture of when it all fits. Now, if you told me you'd been a PA for 6 years, I would have very different thoughts about it because I would have some assumptions that like your clinical skills were already locked and loaded. The only skills for starting a practice would be business ownership, or that you would already have a really strong financial footing and that taking on some additional risk from Airbnb arbitrage might be actually very reasonable and a great way to create semi-passive income. Yeah. Also, be careful with the STR ordinances. Be very careful with that. One of our properties is in an area that they have tried to increase restrictions on permits in order to control the Airbnb population and prevent it from being too strong of competition for the very well endowed people representing hotel chains. And so, like, we just went to our property this past weekend. We have our STR permit and we're good to go. And then we were told by the neighbor, hey, by the way, 5 other people on this street have applied for the STR permit and they've all been denied for various like little reasons, right? Of, oh, hey, your sidewalk's not right or whatever. Ultimately, it's number control that they're doing in the city and they don't want to add additional STRs. And so you have to think about that stuff. If you're going to go buy an STR, or if you're going to go and do Airbnb arbitrage and sign up for a long-term lease, you better make sure that you're able to check your boxes in terms of local ordinances and that you're able to actually own, maybe not own, but operate the thing as an STR, and that you're not going to sign yourself up for something and then go, shoot, I can't do anything with this and end up in a tough spot that way. Okay, let me go see what other questions we have in here. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so this is someone named Braden. I'm new. I'm actually just starting PA school. It's a private school. The cost will be significant. I also went to a private PA school. I know a thing or two about that. Mm. Tips on managing student loans, budgeting, or minimizing debt. Good question. The thing is, the big decision's been made. The big decision happens before you choose the school. Let's be real. You can go to PA school for 300 grand. You can go to PA school for 80 and everything in between. And so the fact that you've already decided school means you've already decided the biggest choice because not only is the tuition fixed, but the local cost of living is decided as well, right? Very, very few PA programs have remote options. So most of the time when you choose a school, you're choosing your cost of living and you're choosing your tuition. That's why when you're thinking about what's my future look like? Is my debt going to be reasonable, surmountable, etc.? You have to think about it before you choose a school. You really need to think about it at the very beginning. Decide your debt to income ratio out of the gate that you're comfortable with, and then choose schools with that in mind. So, for example, debt to income ratio would be total student loan debt divided by first year annual salary that you'll earn. Now, what is the first year annual salary that you'll earn? That's the tough question because I've talked to new grads clearing 180K. I've also talked to new grads who took a job offer at 85 and everything between. And so you can't, I think, we all shoot for the moon, and you should. But you can't assume before you've even gone to PA school that you're going to be the person that gets the 90th percentile job out of school, right? That's not a very valid assumption. I hope it's you, but it's not a valid assumption. And so what I would do is I would choose, hey, these are the top 3 subspecialties I'm looking at. This is the state I'm most likely to live and work in when I'm done. What are the starting salaries for those 3 subspecialties? Of course, it changes, right? But like, what is the range? That's the denominator of your equation. The top number is what is a total debt incurred when I'm done. And you can only figure that out if you know the tuition that's expected and you actually build out a budget for like rent and food and all of those things based that's reasonable based on local cost of living data. And of course, you can do some big things to move the needle there. You can have roommates, you can not DoorDash, right? Like you can cook at home, you can shop at Aldi's. Like there are things you can do to save money, but the big decision happens when you pick the school. That's the thing that drives the debt to income ratio more than anything else. You have to recognize that is completely determining your financial future. If you intentionally move forward and you accept, I will have a very high debt to income ratio, 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 2.5 to 1, right? Meaning like you are going to earn 100K and you have 300K in student loan debt. If you go into it knowing that, you also have to recognize I am expecting to limit my employment options to something that's going to offer me some type of student loan forgiveness. Maybe that's public service loan forgiveness, maybe that's National Health Service Corps, but I'm expecting that even if I graduate and I'm loving the idea of that private practice dermatology job, it's probably not going to work for me because financially, it's not going to make sense. I'm going to end up in a really tough spot where I can't afford my student loan payments or I'm forced to do taxable loan forgiveness or one of those things. If you know, hey, I don't want to have that situation. I don't want to be limited into where I should work based on what qualifies for what forgiveness program, then you need a debt to income ratio as close to 1 as you can swing. As close to 1 as you can swing. And so if you anticipate, hey, I'm probably going to earn 135K when I'm done, you should really try not to have more than $135,000 in student loan debt when you're done, which maybe means you don't go to the private school, you know? Like, again, I did. Now, I will say my total student loan debt was less than that. I think I was at 161,000. It was all from graduate school, from PA school, and that was from a private school. However, I didn't have undergraduate debt. I had scholarships there and I had help from parents there. Had I had undergraduate debt too that I was stacking on top of that, you can see how choosing that private school would have really soared my debt to income ratio up even higher and higher and higher. So keep that in mind. That's the biggest piece of advice I have is choose the school well in the first place. And then all the other stuff you can do to save some money as you go is important. Probably the most important thing you can do though is just to avoid high interest debt. If you can manage to graduate school with just student loan debt, you're winning. You're really winning because it's very easy to accrue 5, 10. I've even talked to people that accrued $60,000 or $70,000 of credit card debt during PA school or any other program. Very easy to do. That's the ticket. If you can manage to live off of your student loans so that your interest rates are in the sixes, right? And then graduate with just that, with as many federal student loans as you can, as little private student loans as you can, so you have more and more options for forgiveness programs, for payment plans, all those things. You're going to position yourself to really be able to nail student loan strategy when you're done and figure out the debt. The more private student loan debt you have, the less options you have, the more credit card debt you have, the more difficult things become, the higher your debt to income ratio. Just to be honest, the more limited you are in what you can reasonably expect to do from an employment standpoint. I hope that helps. We're actually, speaking of student loans, federal student loans, we're going to be having a live event later this month with Caitlin Heil. She's going to walk through all of the student loan updates that we have faced from this administration, what to do, what not to do, and how to anticipate what's coming ahead. So if you have federal student loans of any type, highly recommend you come to that. We'll get that date published, announced. You'll get email invites to that. Again, it's totally free to come. All you have to do is be a club member. And so if you're not in yet, millionairesinmedicine.com/community, you can get in for free and you'll get the invite to that event so that you can get the student loan update. This stuff is changing on a weekly basis. And so if you're not following it, you're falling behind. So if you're like, I'm dazed, I'm confused, I'm not sure what's next, make sure you come to that live event. I think it'll be very helpful. Okay, well, we're at about the 30-minute mark. We've covered some good questions, so I think I'll sign off for tonight. But hope everyone has a good one and talk to you soon.